Hey everybody, Jerry Berg, the poor historian, coming out of hiding apparently. I thought this would be an apt time to return to the YouTube channel, specifically to talk about a subject that's getting a lot of conversation online lately, thanks to a lot of videos and conversation videos about Kenjutsu and HEMA, and comparing and contrasting the two of them. And I wanted to make a quick video here introducing you to a new world, or I suppose you'd call it a subsection of HEMA, um, that makes you realize that you don't have to decide between the two of them. So for those who don't know, HEMA, H-E-M-A, traditionally stands for Historical European Martial Arts, and it is the idea that we can use surviving primary sources, meaning books written by swordsmen about how to sword fight, and that we can read them after translating them and publishing them, and we can learn exactly how, insert era here, swordsmen fought. And you can get more specific than that. It's not just like, here's how Renaissance people fought. It's here's specifically how this one instructor from this one city published a book in this one year about how people should fight from their perspective. I don't need to get into it, but what I do want to let you know is it is one of the purest historical martial art forms out there. There's so many people who are jumping on board with this because the other traditional worlds of swordsmanship just aren't working for them. And I see this in no place more public than in Japanese sword arts or Eastern martial arts or what have you. So I wanted to introduce you guys to historical Japanese sword fighting. Previously in the past, the only major options that you had available, at least here in the US, were schools that taught a variety of different and distinct Japanese sword martial art styles. These include Kendo, Iaido, Kenjutsu, Bato, Koryu. There's a bunch of them out there, and they're fairly distinct. But the big problem is that most people sign up to take one of these classes, from my experience, those who I've talked to and who have subsequently backed out of it, took these classes wanting to get a greater understanding for how the actual samurai fought with a sword. And that's a basic, I suppose you'd say, the perspective of someone who is not a Japanese historian. And I totally understand it because the samurai were epic, and Japan has its own very unique, as well as overwhelming military history. But what I'm here to tell you is that when you take one of these modern Japanese sword art schools, you are not learning the type of sword fighting that you want to learn if you are taking that sword school because you want to learn how to fight like a samurai did on the medieval Japanese battlefield. All of these martial arts, or the majority of them, and I'm sure we'll dive into some of them later on in another video, they are all traditional martial arts. Now, that's not a bad thing. That is centuries of experience on how to change and improve a martial art to better fit the community or better fit the organization or whatever community, country, culture that you're a part of. But, for example, if a school claims to have survived since the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period in Japan, that's awesome, good on them, but it doesn't mean that the techniques that they teach and the method of instruction is the exact same as how the samurai did on the Sengoku Jidai. It has changed and manipulated through the centuries, especially through the extremely long peaceful period, the Edo period of Japan, and which really modified what I suppose the people I've been discussing who would want a practical battlefield application for a katana with the historical standing. Basically, if you have a traditional school that has gone through the Edo period, it has completely manipulated and changed that style of sword fighting from what it was. The reason I keep referring to the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period, is because this was the era the most recent era of Japanese military history where hand-to-hand blade battlefield action was practical. I'm very vaguely speaking here, not a Japanese history video, but the Warring States period ended kind of in 1615 at the Siege of Osaka, and basically began this era of peace with very minimal conflict straight up through the 1850s and 1860s, when Japan had the Boshin War and the Satsuma Rebellion, which basically ended samurai culture. And then you go on to Imperial Japan after that. But what I'm getting at is there is a period of roughly 250 years of peace that have changed Japanese sword fighting. And so inherently, if you are interested in how samurai, bushi, other warriors fought on the Japanese battlefield from the Sengoku Jidai, you cannot get it through traditional Japanese sword arts. Prime example would be the existence of kata. Kata is, very simply put, a predetermined exchange of attack and defenses or techniques to show off how precise and pristine your motions can be. Very beautiful, and an immense amount of skill goes into being able to perform kata. But when you look at these, which is a small section of my collection of Sengoku Jidai manuals translated to English, the existence of a kata in the modern sense is completely void. They are not in here. It leads us to prove, and I guess prove is a red flag for some people, it leads us to conclude that kata in the modern sense were not used in the Sengoku Jidai. There's a lot of logical reasons saying that they did, that they would logically. You know, if you're having to train large armies of Ashigaru and techniques, kata is a perfect way to do so. But we haven't found evidence of it yet in these primary sources. So just keep that in mind. So here's where we are. You want to learn how the battlefield samurai fought, and there are not popular schools that will teach you exactly how to do that. So let me introduce you to Historical Japanese Swordsmanship, a subsection of HEMA, Historical European Martial Arts. Of course, the E in HEMA, European, kind of goes out the window now, but it is essentially, let's just call it Historical Earth Martial Arts. I hereby declare HEMA now means Historical Earth Martial Arts, and incorporates everything. Incorporates the Mexican manuals, the United States manuals, the Chinese manuals that we find, Korean, and of course Japanese. So, haha, problem solved. You still get to keep the cool HEMA acronym. In any case, I digress. Look at all these. These are not all of them. These are some of the, I suppose you'd say, some of my best. They're the ones I had handy here. By the way, please ignore the African artifacts on the wall. I just had to pick this wall. But I did want to introduce you to some of them. This one, for example, is a series of translated works written by Yagyu Munenori and his family and his appropriate clan, published in the very first few years of the 1600s. And that is really cool. This is the first book that I read when I got into historical Japanese martial arts. Now the thing is, and this is going to be for the people who are wanting a HEMA, traditional HEMA, like a Johann Meyer manual for Japan, you're not going to find it. And here's why, and let me explain. So Europe, especially in the late 1500s and the Renaissance, was going through this concept called the scientific revolution. This is very simple. It's an oversimplification, but please bear with me. Where Europe was kind of, I suppose you'd say, first understanding how knowledge actually works, how to best transfer information from one person to another. And you get cool things along with it, like the printing press and the mass publication of media. Books are great. And so you start getting books being published as a learning tool in order to train people. And you start getting practicality as a reason why you should learn this or that thing. However, Japan, and so because of that, you start getting very easy to read, almost textbook-like sword fighting manuals. Johann Meyer is a prime example, and you even get people who kind of stumble through it. Paulus Hector Meyer's manual is kind of like, he's trying. But in Japan, They were not going through a scientific revolution like Europe was. Instead, Japan was focusing on artistry and philosophy. And so you get manuals that are a bit different than our traditional HEMA books to learn. For example, let me pull out another one. If you're looking for a visual depiction of techniques that you can study, you are going to be finding a number of techniques or a number of manuals referred to as mokuroku. Mokuroku are essentially a catalog of techniques that are given by an instructor of some or another school to give to his graduated students, and it's kind of like a reminder, like, hey, don't forget, you spent years practicing this, and here's just my visual reminder. And it usually consists of two dudes, or in this case, a tengu and a dude, holding swords with the name of the technique. So for example, on this particular page, the title of this technique is Auspicious Knowledge Tengu, and the only information that's written down on it is you should use Kote Shibari no Tachi, tying the hands sword method. The end. You got it? You learn how to do the tying the hands sword method from this? No, you can't. So it adds to kind of the mystery, the unsolved mystery that lots of HEMA tried to do, which inevitably will end in a lot of debate. And in the very small historical Japanese community that we have started, there has already been a significant number of debates because of the vagueness of some of this information. But you do get some manuals. For example, going back to Yagyu, his Mokuroku, if I can flip to that page proper. By the way, this one is The Sword and the Mind by Hiroaki Sato. There's a few other translations, and I want to make a separate video on how to properly research Yagyu. I suppose you'd say properly is not really the right word, but how to do it in a way that is not going to leave you completely speechless. So just to show off the Mokuroku of Yagyu, you still get the same thing. By the way, it's the Heiho Mokuroku, the traditional family inherited sword technique manual. And again, you get the two dudes holding swords, in this case another one with a tengu in a person, and the name of the technique. But you get here, somewhere which has been proposed to be published in, or rewritten in 1707, you actually get a description of the technique in the Mokuroku. Now, of course, that leads some variability. The Mokuroku was published in 1601, so it's 106 years since the Mokuroku was made. So maybe the descriptions don't match perfectly, but in terms of visual techniques that you can study, this is the best we've got. With a few other exceptions here too, and hopefully I'll make videos going over some of these. In the meantime, by the way, if you're interested, I mod a Facebook group, Historical Japanese Swordsmanship, HEMA interpretation, a long title. Feel free to join it, join our cool little community. But the point I'm getting at is you're not going to get that simple European stuff with this. Instead, what you're going to get in a lot of these publications, and those of you who've read the iconic and overplayed Book of Five Rings, I'll make a video on that too, you'll know that most of these manuals are not on techniques, but on philosophy, on mindset. And I just happen to open up to a Mokuroku page. But most of the others here are kind of how to live your life, simultaneously how to fight with a katana in Japan with a mindset. Rather than a physical, here's exactly how to move your sword at this proper angle to deflect it. It's more like, here's some poetry to give you an idea of how you should best act in a sword fight or in life. And you see this very well in Yagyu, and we'll go over some details with his in another video. But I wanted to prepare you for that. And it sometimes can get so bad that you get the sword scroll, here's another one, and at first glance, it looks cool. It looks like, all right, I'm gonna follow these silhouettes as perfectly as possible. But the problem is, when you read it, it's all just interpretive poetry with a silhouette next to it. It's fun. It's really fun to interpret it. But the only way that you're going to be able to understand this interpretation is by reading as many of these manuals as you can, understanding that they're going to be different, because there were very, very different philosophies of sword fighting at this time, but you'll understand trends, and you'll understand reasons why you don't see heavy blocks in Japanese sword fighting, or the various methods of parrying that you wouldn't use, or likely wouldn't use in European sword fighting. And it really adds to this mystery to try to uncover how battlefield Japanese samurai or bushi warriors would have fought. And I think it's a lot of fun, and I really want to welcome you on board this world that is brand new and growing, an international community. So please come on board. Probably the best way right now, which is November 2023, is to join that Facebook group. Hopefully it'll grow. Hopefully we'll have lots of communities and expand from there. But you don't need to balance between the modern traditional kenjutsu and the primary source scholarly interpretive HEMA if you want to learn how battlefield samurai fought. We've got it right here. So this video will leave lots of questions to be answered. Obviously, it's a very brief overview, but I wanted to introduce it to you guys, and hopefully this will kickstart my YouTube channel and getting more videos, more frequently, rather than the 4-year hiatus I just took. So in any case, you guys are great. Keep up the hard work. You're doing just fine, and I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.